we're going to make sure that, people come into our ecosystem and they live a longer, healthier, better life. You see in the blue zones, it is, whole food diet, and it's sleep, and it's movement, and it's community and relationship, right? And that's where it is. And in boutique fitness, we're able to build that community and relationship in these small boxes that you can't really easily build in a big box. For me, it's about us having control of the business. People don't realize that I sold control of Exponential, to TPG and Club Pilates in 2017. So as much as I was running the business, I still had a parent, and the parents stepped in and told me what to do in a lot of key ways and times. And so what we like about today is that we own 100% of the business. We have no debt.
We're live. I'm Matthew Januszek. Welcome to this week's episode of Lifts. And this week we're looking at one of the most influential movements our industry has seen in the last few decades, which is the rise and evolution of boutique fitness. From my perspective, I was first exposed with boutique fitness movement in London in the UK in 2013 when James and Sandy McCaskill opened the first Barry's Bootcamp studio in Euston Road in London. It was the first premium American boutiques to arrive in the UK, and it really transformed the fitness experience. And I think it kind of proved that people would pay for premium specialist fitness. And it became quite culturally relevant. We had celebrities like, who was big in the UK, David Beckham, who sort of really helped raise awareness for that concept. And then interestingly, that same year, Orange Theory entered the UK through a partnership with David Lloyd. That was led by friend Hazel Geary. And it seemed as though it's another sign that boutique fitness, it wasn't just a fad, it was something that a lot of key investors and big operators over there were looking at and looking, as to understand what would happen. And then in 2014, there was a homegrown challenger emerged, and many people would probably know the son of Mike Balfour from Fitness First. His son James recognized that consumers wanted something different, and he created the One Rebel, which opened in January 2015 opposite the Gherkin in London. And that really set a new benchmark in sort of boutique fitness design and experience. So there's a lot of things from the UK side. Really interested to sort of follow that journey to see what happened in the US. And so to introduce our guest today and the subject, I'm going to hand over to my co-host, Mohammed Iqbal.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you so much for that. I'm incredibly excited about today's guest and our topic. And I just want to double click on my boutique experiences. I don't know if you would call this boutique, but I grew up in New Jersey, moved there from Dubai in 91, but I was a member of New York Sports Club in the early 2000s. And this is not necessarily boutique, but Les Mills was my first experience to group training. And then very, very early on, I was a SoulCycle rider, and I think in the second or third studio in New York City. That to me was my first experience into boutique fitness. But today we have Anthony, who is the founder of multiple boutique brands. And in a lot of ways, he actually created boutique fitness. And this is really interesting because I didn't have a chance to try out LA Boxing, but Anthony was actually the founder of LA Boxing. A lot of us know him for founding Exponential and now Sequel Brands. I don't want to get too much into your bio, Anthony, because everyone knows you. We are aware of it. You are well covered, but incredibly excited to welcome you to Lyft. But I guess if you could kind of take us back to LA Boxing, what was the thesis behind that concept? Because you clearly saw something before anyone else did.
Yeah, and I'd love to take credit for the original founding of LA Boxing, but it existed when I founded in 2002. And at that point, it was really kind of like your Rockies boxing gym, out of Philly or Brooklyn or something like that you've seen. It was a old dilapidated building off the beaten path. It had an electrical fire in the corner years prior, and they just never fixed it. The bags were more duct tape than they were vinyl or leather. Literally, the treadmill was unplugged because the motor died, and people would just push the treadmill motor to go. Had a coin-opt massage chair in the corner like it was out of an airport that was a quarter. There was no real membership dues. The people at the desk just took your $300 in cash because that's what you could get out of the Circle K ATM next door. And they said, hey, man, you're good for a year. Come and do what you want. So I joined that boxing gym after having, poor health. I was basically doing the opposite of what we know today creates great health. So I wasn't sleeping. I was eating fast food and drinking Coke and donut holes. And I literally thought the brown stuff in the Lucky Charms was the good stuff. And so I just separated it and ate the marshmallows. So if I was feeling under the weather, I would eat Frosted Flakes, good old Tony the Tiger, because I thought that was really the health food. And so clearly 20 plus years ago, I was lost. Wasn't feeling good from that. Went to a doctor that said, hey, why don't you try eating right, sleeping, and working out and see how that goes. And I'd done the typical workouts that everybody else had done where you hire the big guy on steroids and he helps you lift the heavy weight off of you and counts for you over and over again. That was really the PT model, right, that existed, call it 25 years ago now. And I stopped by this LA boxing gym that was in my neighborhood. It was owned by a couple of fighters. There was no marketing, no customer service, no membership sales, no retail. Just no nothing. And I joined it. And what I figured out very quickly is that people were there for the workout and the experience. They weren't there for the customer service, the building, the retail, any of those kind of things. But there was a massive opportunity. And when I went to USC's entrepreneur program, it was about 100 kids got into that program every year. And we pounded opportunity recognition, right? And we pounded knowing the customer and we pounded solving a problem. And when I looked at it, I was like, it's very interesting. You have people pulling up in very expensive cars, driving from Newport Beach into Costa Mesa. You have them paying really whatever, and they're showing up dealing with poor customer service, a dilapidated building. Why are they here? And it was like any other good, down home restaurant where you're like, the location sucks, the food sucks, or food's great, service sucks. It must be the food, right? It's the only thing it could possibly be. It's the only reason why anybody's coming back here is because of the workout and the experience. And so with that, I bought that location. I opened a second one. I opened a third one. And then I was out of capital because it was mine. I was begging, borrowing, whatever I could. I didn't have any family that had any money. So I was financing things on credit cards. I was able to get an SBA loan, back in the day for a few $100,000 and just use the profit from, 1 and 2 to do 3. Then I was out of money and I met a franchise broker who said, you really should franchise this. And I knew as much about franchising as anybody else. I knew McDonald's was a franchise, and that was kind of really it. And so, that was back in 2002 that we did that. I started franchising it in 2004. So I hate to tell you, Matthew, but about a decade before the UK got it, we were living it in Southern California. But boutique fitness wasn't a word. It wasn't a Wikipedia word. And I continued to operate LA Boxing, as a franchisor until the UFC came along. And they had, 5 or 6 big box locations at that time. It was basically a 24-hour fitness rebranded into UFC. And Dana and the Fertittas came along and said, hey, we'd like to buy what you're doing because it's small, it's in the community, CapEx is light, you're franchising. These little boxes are, producing money for franchisees, and we like the model. And, and so UFC came along and bought it, and we rebranded it. And that was really kind of the birth of it. But we had memories a long time ago, but I want to say we had 60, 70, something like that open when the acquisition happened, and maybe 100, 150, something like that sold. And so we put a couple guys in a van with paint and stuff, and they drove the country repainting and rebranding all the LA Boxings into UFC gym. And that that was kind of the first time that you had a, call it a multi-billion-dollar brand come together with boutique fitness. And so that was really how my career started. And, you know, it really was until Orange Theory. You know, you can go back and look on the internet. I don't know that there was a scaled boutique fitness, you know, that was out there. And there definitely wasn't a scaled boutique fitness franchisor. So we, you know, me and the team, the same team I have today, primarily, really went and paved that way. And we've been doing it for the last 20 years.
So there's a couple of things that you just mentioned there, Anthony, which I think that you probably did a little bit differently to most people. Like the first one is LA Boxing was originally just a couple of studios, and I'm curious to know in terms of the format, because you went on and had a number of different formats from boxing, and now Pilates and stretching and a few other concepts. But the first thing that you did was had a concept that was very experiential and managed to duplicate that in a franchise. And anybody that was doing franchise before, there's a lot of brands in things like the fast food business where it's relatively standard that you have machines and you have a production line and you can easily duplicate that. But one of the things that certainly I've seen in, you know, when it comes to certain fitness products is being able to duplicate that in different markets can be a little bit more challenging than maybe making burgers or smoothies or something. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that you did that was quite different even from Orange Theory at the time is that you made a decision to put together a collection of brands under one roof. So for people that are listening that are in the industry or running businesses, just talk through those 2 points in terms of what you've learned around the sort of models that successfully scale and the ones that are a little bit more challenging, and then the philosophy or reasoning behind putting multiple different brands together under one roof.
Yeah, look, I think you know, from the first question when we did LA Boxing, you know, our first franchisee came out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, which we didn't expect. You know, we had one location here in Southern California. It had been there for a while. We opened the second one and the third one. So we're like, who's coming to us? It would only be Southern California people, probably a member or, you know, somebody in the community. And we got an ex-SWAT cop named Ches Lovato from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who showed up. We picked him up at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, and he became our first franchisee. So, you know, what we learned very quickly, to your point, was everybody we counted on locally, whether that was contractors or suppliers or people who could train our instructors or our network of getting instructors, you know, was gone. And so I remember we loaded everything up in a U-Haul truck, drove it to Albuquerque, flew in, went down to the city. You know, here in Southern California, it takes like, you know, 3-4 months to get permits, right? So we all went down to Albuquerque with our plans, and we're like, we're going to live in Albuquerque until we get this done right for the franchisee. And it took us all of 5 minutes to get our plans rubber stamped for like $18 or whatever it was at the time. So that part was pretty crazy. But even when we went to Albuquerque originally, you know, we opened up, and I don't know if you remember the movie Cobra Kai and Karate Kid, the studio. That's what we lived through. So we had Mike Winklejohn, which ended up becoming John Jones's coach, as John Jones, you know, kind of came out of that spot. But we had Winklejohn and a couple other guys. Like, they literally came into our store and told us we needed to close down and get out of town, right? And then smashed some things, kicked some bags, and said, we'll be back. And then me and my partner, who was a professional fighter, got on the next flight, flew to Albuquerque, went to his store, and said, this is not going to fly. Like, we'll live in this town if that's what we got to do, right? So you even had in our very first franchise, right? You had some like tough guy turf war that was kind of straight out of a movie. And then, you know, we're trying to get instructors. And then, you know, we continued to support the franchisee by being in town. I don't know how long it was before we even made money out of that box, because we put so much into it. And so, that was how it started. And then we went to the second one, the third one, and the fourth one, and continued to evolve. But we knew it was about the product, right? And so we made sure. And in LA boxing, it was tough, different than Rumble, where in Rumble those aren't professional fighters, right? It was guys that looked better than they fought, right? And did a good job at the sequencing and the flow, kind of like a Soul Cycle instructor is probably not going to be in the Tour de France. Same kind of thing here. And but at LA Boxing, they were all professional fighters. I mean, we had plenty of guys that were, multi-championship belt title holders, right? And so that was what we looked for. So we looked for a pool of ex-fighters, either out of boxing, kickboxing, mixed martial arts at the time. And then we put them through our training course, which was like, this is how you teach fighting, right? Boxing, kickboxing, MMA. This is how you teach this to a suburban housewife in a way that you don't freak her out and she understands. And I remember the first instructors would come in, we turned on music. A guy named Gennaro Hernandez, Chiquinito Hernandez, he's two-time world champion, and Boxing Hall of Fame. And he came in and we started teaching, and he's like, dude, turn the music off. Like, they can't hear me. How am I teach these people how to fight with music? We're like, well, you're not going to really teach them how to fight, right? You're going to teach them combinations. This is a workout. We're trying to burn calories, these kinds of things, right? And so, definitely was a learning curve and a transition. And then, I did UFC gym. I exited that, and was really home on the couch. My wife was pregnant with our first daughter, and and somebody in the local area here said, hey, there's a lady that started a Pilates business in San Diego, and it's not going that well. And she started franchising to instructors, friends, and family. There's no support. Company's not making any money. Can you go help her? And I was like, yeah, sure. She's an hour away. I've been hanging out on the couch for 6 months, going to doctor's appointments. And sure, I'll go down and go to San Diego and get lunch. And that was what I did. That evolved into that person saying, hey, look, like, just buy this from me. And so I did that. And that really kind of started. I didn't know what Pilates was. The reformer looked like a torture chamber. Sarah Luna, who has run multiple businesses for me now and runs Pilates for us today at Sequel, but she ran Club Pilates Pure Bar, was the president of Exponential's portfolio company, and now runs Pilates Addiction for us. She taught me my first Pilates private at Equinox when I wanted to go find out what Pilates even was. And that was how I met Sarah. She ended up being an MBA, just got her MBA, and was a professional dancer, Pilates instructor, and one of my very first employees at Club Pilates. But we started Club Pilates was the first brand under the portfolio, Matthew, that you mentioned, and then as we started to evolve. We looked at things like cycling, and we looked at things like rowing and dance, and stretching came along. We found through mutual contact, we found Stretch Lab, which had 3 locations that were making some money but not amazing money in LA. And people thought when I bought that, they're like, stretching location, like, who's going to go to a stretching gym? I can stretch at home. And we ended up opening, I think, 500 or 600 of those, and doubling revenues from where they were to kind of to their height. And so, we started looking, to your point, we started looking for these experiences that people could have, right? We found Row House out of New York. We found AKT out of New York. And so, we're kind of finding brands really that were, Southern California based and Manhattan based, because those were kind of the 2 meccas of boutique fitness, right? And so we started putting those under the portfolio to create this holding company that would hold all these experiential brands in health and wellness.
Has anything changed from that fundamental eye or foundational eye that you had for what made boutique fitness important So you sold LA Boxing, I believe, in 2012. You then folded Club Pilates, which you, by the way, I think when you acquired it, it had about 30 studios, maybe less.
Yeah, I think
Into
it was somewhere in the high, maybe in the high teens. It had 5
Yep,
corporate stores and I think about 12 or 13 franchises that weren't making any money when we bought it.
and you scale that to over 1,000, and into
Mhm.
exponential. I think it all kind of came
Yep.
into exponential in 2017, but now you have sequel. As you think about your journey, or the things that you look for in a brand and what makes it successful, still the same, because clearly modality wasn't something that you feel, I think, was consistent, because you look for other things outside of that. What has
Yep.
changed from LA Boxing days to what you're looking for today in sequel?
I mean, really nothing. We're still looking for those experiences. The experiences will change over time, right? We saw, and when COVID happened, obviously it decimated the fitness industry, and I don't think the fitness industry has actually ever recovered. And it's been 6 years. I don't even know that they're actually back. In some cases, they might be in some modalities back. But for instance, we saw cycling post COVID go down 30% globally, right? You saw Flywheel go to 0 locations. You saw SoulCycle close half. You saw Cycle Bar close a bunch. If you think about it, if there was 30% margins, just for easy math, and revenue goes down 30%, now there's no more margin. At the same time, post COVID, when I took over Club Pilates, the math was roughly 250,000 a year, something like that. The stores were doing about 20 grand a month. And right when COVID happened, Cycle Bar and Club Pilates were like neck and neck on revenue, on average revenue for the franchisees. And people don't remember that. I was bonusing Sean Grove and Ryan Junk back and forth for them to compete to who could do the best for the franchisees on their revenue, because it was so close. And then post COVID, people just in general, like someone, put out an email to the globe, said, okay, less cycling, more Pilates. I would love to take credit for, we did something super genius in Pilates post COVID. But the reality was we were running the business well, but we just continued to run the business well. And you saw this sort of global explosion of Pilates. Now people could say everyone had a Peloton, they got sick of cycling. You can say people started to change their experiences. You saw, I think, a 25% drop in Orange Theory that I don't know that they ever really recovered from. So some of these things, some of these experiences just changed, right? People's pathways during COVID changed.
Well, I think people got more into longevity, into wellness, understood that maybe HIIT as a modality is not what is best for you. But when you look at Pilates, it really serves a lot of those longevity pillars: strength, flexibility, low impact. So just
Yeah,
feel like it was a right product at the right time, and you were just the most accessible product.
yeah, for sure. I mean, we built, I think it was like 1,300 stores in 12 countries or whatever, whatever the math was, at the time. But yeah, so we were in that space, and some launched right before COVID, and just couldn't really get off the ground, as much as we'd want them to. And then some of the experiences changed. Like I said, cycling went down, Pilates went up. And it's anyone's guess, right? Your guess is, was the crosshairs of everything interesting at the right time, right? Like, okay, maybe. Was it that, Orange Theory was so massive, and, when they're processing almost $2 billion of membership dues and they go down by 25%, there's a $500 million up for grabs, right? So, that money was cycling money, right? Clearly today we know, that people are focused on longevity, like you talked about, right? But COVID started for sure that longevity march for people, and that wellness march for people, where they started to say, like, hey, I'm in charge of my health. I think everybody thought that the FDA or somebody out there was in charge of their health. And when COVID happened, people were like, all right, hide your wives, hide your kids, lock your doors. We don't know what to tell you. Good luck. right? And that's what it was. And we all started wiping handles down in our kitchens and like, oh my God, it's coming in the windows. So nobody knew what it was doing. But I think the big piece there was that people started to figure out, like, I'm in charge of me, right? I'm in charge of my health. I'm in charge of my longevity. I'm in charge of the quality of my life during my longevity. You started to see lean muscle mass, things like that. Strength training started to evolve. And so, yeah, Pilates was right in that crosshairs. But yoga did very well for us. Pilates did very well for us. Stretching did very well for us. So there were a lot of brands, that did well. And there were a lot of brands that started off doing really well, but into the face of COVID didn't do very well. And we'll never know if it would have been that experience, if it would have been that brand, or if it was COVID, right? Because how do you take off into those like kind of massive headwinds, right? To really kind of get off the ground, get scale, and kind of push through.
One of the things I think questions that people have is in terms of your part of your career at Exponential. I'm aware that you're still a shareholder there, but as an individual, you've been through a lot. You've been a bootstrap founder that had a few clubs, as you talked about, with LA Boxing, and you built what must have been one of the most recognizable brands in the fitness industry, which went on to create a lot of news in mainstream media. And I'm just interested about your personal journey, Anthony, because a lot of people listening to this go through ups and downs in business. It's not all success stories, even though you seem to be one of the great success stories or great entrepreneurs within the fitness industry. But talk us a little bit about your personal situation. How did you deal with that as an individual? What were some of the things that you did to sort of brush it off, to decide to start another business and to move on? And how did you balance, I guess, a lot of the noise that was happening, maybe people choosing their own version of the story, but keeping pretty focused to get where you are today? Because I think that's quite important. And I think those are the challenges that we all have as individuals, where you're sort of sitting at home, you're reading the stuff, your business potentially hasn't gone the way you wanted to, and yet you've got to get out there and smile and say, right, I'm going to get up again and start another day.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could take two different views of Exponential, right? But the reality, when you go to data, there's always feelings and emotion and opinions. And the reality was you had massive law firms, both in the franchising space and the corporate space. You had Deloitte and Touche as a massive auditor, auditing the numbers. And so everything that happened at Exponential was real, right? And as a part of that reality, was every franchisee doing well? No, right? You got 6,000 franchises sold, right? You got to look at the sheer amount of it, right? 4 or 5 times what Orange Theory did, right? And so when you look at that, if you had 6,000 customers come through your drive-through at McDonald's, did all 6,000 burgers, where they all come out exactly the same? It was perfect. Every customer was happy. Every meal was on time. Of course, that's what you're striving for, right? But like we've seen on the internet with Yelp reviews and whatever else it is, there's a lot of opinions. And it's easy to have an opinion when you don't know the business, you're not in the business, and you're a keyboard tough guy, right? That's super simple. But the people that understood the business, that had all the facts, the attorneys, the auditors, the actual analysts from Bank of America or Jefferies or those types of people that were putting out, the facts, those were the facts, right? And, are there franchisees that didn't do well? Sure, right? And if you look at the numbers, if you said 10% didn't do well, that means 90% did. And you find me a business where 90% of the things are going right. Good luck, right? And so, but at 10% not going well at 6,000, you could have 600 people, right, that can make noise. And that's what we saw. But the reality was, there's tons of franchisees, right, at Exponential. There's franchisees that are doing $60 million of EBITDA today, right, that are there. There's ones that are selling in New York right now for $75 million at 10 times their $7.5 million of EBITDA, right? There's all these acquisitions that are happening that came out of Exponential. So, there are people that made money. Are there people that lost money? For sure. But, if you had 6,000 kids go to Harvard, all 6,000 aren't graduating as valedictorian. They all don't go through the system and do all of their homework. They all don't show up sober every day. These are human beings that we're dealing with. And so we did our best we could to support the franchisees. That's what we were dedicated to. You saw average unit volumes grow every quarter over quarter for a very long period of time. You saw us continue to sell franchises. So franchisees came back to buy more. You saw the company opening 500 to 600 locations a year. So it's hard to do all of that year over year and do it thousands and thousands and thousands of times and then have it be this like crazy smokescreen. And so the reality for us internally was it's a shame, right, that there's some people that view it differently. It's a shame that some people, we would love everybody to come in and make money. And I don't think you have to look far past to see that probably 85% of my employees here are the C-suite and entire teams from Exponential that followed me, right? I got employees here that been with me 15, 16 years. And so all of those people know the reality. And the reality was that, we were operating a good business. Was it perfect? No, wasn't perfect. We were buying franchisee stores back that weren't doing well. And then we were telling the public, we're buying these stores back. We're holding these stores. And it was about 85 stores at the time. But when you think about having 2,000, 3,000 open with 85, it's a few percent, right? So, but the numbers were big because the company was so massive, right? We were processing short of $2 billion in memberships, through the system, through the point of sale system. And so, for us, it wasn't really about being down in the dumps and picking ourselves up like the Phoenix.
What about you personally, though, Anthony? Like, are you a character where this doesn't bother you and it's just brushes off, or did you have a bit of a tough time for a period?
Oh, for sure, I'm human, right? And to see people post lies that some lady in Wichita, Kansas, who's never met me, knows nothing about me, posting whatever she wants on the internet. Sure. I'm sure it bothers Kim Kardashian too, if she, reads it. And so, yeah, there was a lot of lies posted. And, at the end of the day, this is the business I'm in. I've been successful in this business. Like I said, the team followed me over to Sequel. They were the driver of it. I didn't recruit them. When I left Exponential, the teams were calling me saying like, Dad, are you going to do something else? Because I'm leaving here and I want to go be with you. But if I can't be with you, then I got to go somebody else because I'm getting treated poorly. Right. And so that was kind of the start of it, where I was like, okay, financially, I didn't have to go do it, right? But from a perspective of those employees there that were treated poorly, they deserved a good home. They deserved to continue to be in the family. They deserve to continue to produce in their careers and have opportunity. And so with that, I was like, all right, let's keep going. But I only wanted to do it if everybody wanted to come along. I didn't want to go find the next Ryan Junk, the next Sarah, the next Verdine, the next Lindsay Junk. Like, I didn't want to go find all these people to go. New construction teams, new real estate teams. I didn't want to do that. But all of those teams were calling saying like, can we go? Will you start something somewhere? And those calls came, the day of and during. Like, the board and I were not seeing eye to eye on a lot of things. I thought that performance over time makes the stock price go up. I thought that continue to provide support to franchisees as best we could, wherever we could, to drive revenue would make the stock go up. The reality is, in the public world, that's not necessarily true.
which is interesting because you kind of founded this in some ways competing brand. But I want to shift gears and just ask you a couple of questions around if you are still as bullish on boutique fitness, which clearly you must be because Sequel is built on that. When you look at big gym operators, you look at the premium sector like Lifetime and Equinox, they're continuing to invest in boutique. Lifetime has invested in Pilates as is Equinox as well. You also see it at the bottom end of the sector on the value chain when you look at brands like EOS or Choose Fitness or even Amp Fitness. They're all adding in Pilates and other boutique modalities into their offering. At the same time, you're seeing the rise of longevity clinics come in here. Your friend Adam Sedlak is opening up a wellness clinic within the UFC, I believe in Corona. He's opening this new kind of built-in wellness clinic as well. Given all that, given how big box operators are now trying to do boutique, which they've tried before, it was Group X, and they've tried to add boutique, haven't really been able to capture that, but now they're investing more. Pilates is becoming this anchor tenant, if you will, of a box within a box. Do you still feel like boutique has room to grow, and how have you innovated that with Sequel?
Yeah, look, I think there's two kinds of boutique, right? There is the buffet version, right? Which I love Bahram. I love Lifetime. I love the Yees that run LA Fitness. All great human beings, great families, great operators. So I have nothing poor to say about those people whatsoever. But their job is a little bit different than kind of what we do at Sequel, right? Their job is to be a hospital, right, that has cardiologists, neurologists, right, nurseries that have babies, pediatrics. They have to use their square footage to do a lot of things well, right? And so it's more of a buffet approach, right? I'm a member at Lifetime, God bless Bahram, takes my $600 or $700 every month and increasing every time I get an email, right? And so I think it's great. But, if you looked at the front desk of somebody coming into Lifetime, you wouldn't know what they were there for. They could be getting their hair done, their nails done, getting a smoothie, lifting a weight, going to Pilates, doing a HIIT class. They're just there for the sauna like my dad. Who knows what they're there for? When you walk into a Pilates addiction, you don't wonder if they're there to lift weights, go to the sauna, get their hair done, right? It's a very, very unique piece. So I tell people it's much like, if you were part of the automotive group of America, or you were in the Porsche Club of America, or are you a part of the motorcycle America, or are you in the Harley Davidson owners group, right? So there's two kinds of, when we kind of talk boutique, two different ways to deliver it, right? And so, for us, we're delivering that one-off specialized, we focus on this, right? Like, we're cardiologists, we're not dentists, we're not neurologists, we're cardiologists. And if you really have a cardiac problem, you're going to the best cardiologist. You're not going to an urgent care, right? And so that's kind of the difference. So they deliver a buffet version of it, right? They do it well. But we view that we deliver each of those modalities better and more specifically and tailored to a different kind of customer who wants to just do that.
I want to talk now a little bit about, I guess, a slightly new concept, which is your partnership with Gary Brecker. He's somebody that has really blown up on social media. Got a lot of interest and a lot of people following him, which seems to be a really smart move. I heard you, and I think it was last year when I was at the ATN event in New York where I first heard about it. So tell us a little bit about the partnership, and is that, from a brand perspective, is that slightly different, having an actual individual that you're partnering with as opposed to a concept? And then also talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing with that may be a little bit new or different from what anyone else has seen.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we did ATN, Gary was just my friend. I approached him and we were kicking around the idea of Ultimate Longevity Center, right? So that would have been called the beginning of summer, 2025. We announced it in December of 2025 at our franchisee convention. So, Gary and I met. We had mutual friends, but kind of digitally, but really met Gary for the first time from Dana White ringside at a fight in Las Vegas, where I was talking to Dana. And, Gary came up and it was like, oh, Gary, meet, whatever. I'm like, yeah, I know who you are. And then we kind of talked, and Callie Means was there, and Sage, Gary's wife. And, we all just kind of hung out a bit and exchanged numbers. And it was like, hey, let's keep talking about this. Gary had always wanted to open 1,000 locations. That was just kind of like a number he had always thrown out, that, he wanted to give, call it the average American, right? Not the 1%ers, not the people in, Beverly Hills and South Florida and Manhattan. Those are his customers, right? He wants to help those people. And he always helped the elites, right? Call it, that are out there, the famous people, the very wealthy people who had access. But, what he really wanted to do was help the people in middle America that actually had never heard of this. And so he wanted to do it via the internet, via social media, via platform. He's got about 225 million views a month coming in. He's the number one, podcast on Spotify for his market. So he really is the voice of longevity. There's nobody else out there mathematically that has the reach that Gary does. But he realized that, once he said something and they watched a clip on social media, the number one question he always got was like, well, now where do I start? Now what? Now what do I do? So it's like Gary hung up the phone. He gave you all this great information, and then you're staring at the phone. You're like, well, what do I do now? What do I eat? What do I drink? What store do I go to? What do I buy? And so he wanted to have these brick and mortar locations, has always thought of that, to really give access to people, access to these protocols. And so, that was what we designed. And, we partnered with LifeForce to run the medical side of the business. And then, Gary is running kind of what we call the playground, right? Which is, the hyperbaric chambers and red lights, lymphatic drainage, and, hypoxia training, and all these things that we have. And so, that's kind of how the business is broken up. And then, Sequel obviously has the ability to sell franchises, scale, and drive revenue for the franchisee. And so that's kind of the tripod partnership between, Sequel, between Gary, and between LifeForce.
And he's had some experience with that. So he initially kind of teamed up with Brandon and 10X Health, and then they went their own ways. Was there any learnings that he had from that experience? And I guess also, how is this new product different from what 10X Health offers?
Yeah, I can't really comment on it because I don't know that. I never saw 10X scale. So I was never in a 10X store. I don't know. I don't even know if they had a store or what their offerings were. So I couldn't really, comment on kind of what they did. I can tell you from our perspective, we'll have clinic rooms, right? So people will come in, we'll get baseline blood draws for people because people are supplementing for supplement's sake. They think they can't afford longevity, but they're really spending $300 a month on supplements they don't need, that their body can't use. So you're better off spending the money to figure out what it is that you need, right? Like my vitamin D is really good. I'm in the sun all the time. I'm a sun seeker. And so I don't need to, swallow a bunch of vitamin D like I live in an igloo in Alaska, right? So, everybody has a different baseline, and everybody's body genetically can process certain nutrients and can't process others. So, we use LifeForce to run a baseline so we can figure out what supplementation somebody may need. Hopefully they get that through a whole food diet, right? And movement, and sunlight and fresh air and all the basics, right? That are there. In the cases where people can't get those nutrients, either genetically or for other reasons, we'll be able to supplement those pieces, whether that's testosterone or, HRT type stuff, peptides as, legalized and become available. all those different things. We'll be able to do blood draws and injections, have a full clinic. But we'll also be able to put people in hyperbaric chambers and, lymphatic drainage and red light. We're seeing crazy things with red light. You see our red light bed that Joe Rogan bought live on the podcast with Gary because he's crazy. And he bought that and then he started using it. And then you see him posting that he got rid of his reading glasses. He got his vision back.
That's
right?
wild.
So
I did not know that.
There's crazy things that are happening in this space for humans. And getting oxygen back in the system, right? And so there's all sorts of things we'll be doing on the playground side. We'll have saunas, we'll have all that type of stuff, and then we'll have what we call the apothecary, which is a retail side. So Gary's protocols that people can take home, whether it's Baja Gold Salt or Perfect Amino or H2 tabs. That protocol, by the way, is across all 5 of our brands and all of our locations with Gary. And we're starting seminars with Gary. We have our first one coming up August 16th in LA. Where Gary's going to appear. And, right now we've got, we're on track to have 13,000 people registered to come see Gary. He's got 30,000 people coming in Romania. He's selling out arenas in Sydney and Asia. And so he is a global phenomenon, right? Not just a US based person. And so, we'll be doing that. And, our target customer, we go into LA, you've got 20 stores, Gary drops in. You have 13,000 people that show up, and now you got 13,000 customers in LA for the franchisees, right? So, so the business model works. I mean, outside of him being on Megyn Kelly this week talking about Ultimate Longevity Center, or he's posting a video for every opening. Hey, Boulder, Colorado, we're coming. Hey, Carlsbad, we're coming. Hey, Centennial in Denver, we're coming. So he's very excited about what we're producing here. We've sold about 225 franchises without a store open. And so the demand is there. And, we've sold that over the last 4 months or so. And we sold 325 Pilates addictions. Those are coming out and getting open and doing extremely well. Franchisees are opening their second store, their third store. And so we're seeing that produce, we figured the thesis behind Sequel is like, if you took the Club Pilates team and you put them into what I'll call new version of Pilates, right? Kind of a younger demographic. We have like gold dipped reformers, right? Lighting systems, sound systems, dark rooms. You take the Club Pilates team and you put them into Pilates addiction, you should get the same financial outcome, right? That was the idea. And so far we're seeing that happen. This next month we start a cadence of opening 20 of those a month for a little bit there, which is good. So we're getting a lot of these on the ground. We should be my bet is by the end of next year, we're the second largest player by open unit count, in the globe, second to Club Pilates. And number 1 in kind of that modern Pilates space. So I think we'll be pretty close to that, by the end of next year, early 2028. So it's developing quickly. And so, we're excited to start getting Ultimate Longevity Centers open. The first ones are opening. We just started pre-sale in Boulder, which has been great, So we're seeing good things coming out of that space. UBS has longevity pegged at $8 trillion over the next 48 months, which is, I don't know what AI was. I don't know what other tech booms were, but people get excited about $1 trillion launch of SpaceX. I get excited about an $8 trillion launch of longevity.
Well, what about just on that then? And I know this is a difficult one for you to answer because of your position, but let see if you can take off your Sequel hat for a moment. And you're a young, inspiring entrepreneur, want to get involved in franchising. You're based in LA. Obviously, it's a very competitive market. There's a lot of Pilates studios. There's spin studios. There's longevity studios. What would be one that you would start with? And I know there's a number of complementary ones that eventually you want to open. But what's the one that you seem as though there's going to be the most growth potential to to build as a young budding entrepreneur that wants to open the first brand with someone like Sequel?
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't have to look further than the brands we've acquired, and that we're trying to produce, right? You look at Beam, for instance, right? You see all of the stuff that's coming out on saunas, right? Original kind of sauna work. You see it infrared sauna where you're seeing these 50% cuts in morbidity, all cause morbidity from 5 days in the sauna. So you continue to see this. So we're excited about Beam with sauna and red light. So we think that is a great way to go. So I think we're 70, 75 open on that brand. We have Body 20 for electric muscle stimulation, which, as you guys know, being in the space, that's how people work out outside of the U.S. It's not known in the U.S. as well, and that was primarily because of FDA approvals on the equipment. But we now have dry suits that are fully disconnected, so we can do boutique fitness small group for EMS. Gary and I just went and did a workout on the beach to show it was totally disconnected and dry. And Gary thought the workout was amazing. And so, we just did that. We have iFlex, which is the team that took Stretch Lab from 300, Verdine and Austin and Sasha and, literally that kind of entire team that was over there. And we have iFlex, right? And so we're doing more recovery type work than we were at Stretch Lab. We've designed a smaller kind of half size box that allows people to get into that space. And so, of course, that's where I think the market is going. If I thought the market was, cycling today, I'd be buying something in cycling, right? So you don't have to go much further than kind of the 5 modalities or brands, that we're trying to scale.
One of the things we love to wrap up with, and we're almost at time here, Anthony. So Matthew, I'd love to start with you. Any key takeaways? I just have a ton of notes from this episode here, but any key takeaways for you?
Well, I love Anthony's resilience. I guess that's what makes a great entrepreneur, and hearing some of the things that he's been through from being sort of like in his early days where going into a town and having the local mafia come up on him. I'm not sure I'd have jumped on a plane straight away to go and sort it out myself, but yeah, certainly I think it's, for me as a person in business, it's just, I'm really impressed what you've done now with Sequel. And just sort of keen to follow the journey. And I guess the second thing is really just obviously you're making an interesting bet on some of the brands that you're involved with, from stretching to longevity, and I'm sure that gives everybody an interesting signal about where we'll see the industry in the next few years. Mo, what are your takeaways?
I think one, I'm just impressed by the story of Anthony, one, founding boutique fitness in so many ways. This is really, and maybe you've had other cycles, but really a third major push in boutique. I think I feel good about his commitment to boutique. That makes me feel better about the boutique industry in general, because there's been a lot of people who've said that in some ways boutique might face headwinds, but I really think it's more of an evolution of what boutique means to people. And I think, Anthony, you so eloquently said this buffet concept where you could get everything here, but if you really want to be prescriptive and more personalized and behind tent, which is, by the way, where consumers are going at all ends of the spectrum, on the lower, more value end and also the premium. Personalization to me is what the consumer wants today. They want to be prescriptive on the treatments that they're getting, whether that is a workout or it's an IV drip. So I think I'm excited to see how Sequel really leans into that.
Yeah, I mean, we just launched what we're calling our 6th brand. You may have seen it this week, which is a Move.ai app. And, and we're trying to put all that together, right? That's the idea in it, that we'll have this ecosystem. We have, our 5 brands under there so that we can be prescriptive, right? That we can, somebody comes to the longevity business, we can actually prescribe workouts for them on top of the longevity, right? And those workouts could be an EMS workout for them if they're on a GLP-1 and, they need to create lean muscle mass. A great way to do it is EMS, right? And so, we have this ecosystem piece as well with the launch of our 6th brand to keep people there. We'll have Gary's protocols in there. We'll have nutrition in there. And then, we also have the workouts in there. And it is exactly what you said, Mo, which is to be prescriptive, to give that customer who comes into our ecosystem to say, hey, you may be doing Pilates, but Pilates is great, but you also should have a baseline blood draw, and you should be in a sauna and a red light. And you maybe have a baseline blood draw, sauna and red light, but what are you doing on nutrition, right? And what are you doing on supplementation and all these other things? So, we're going to make sure that, people come into our ecosystem and they live a longer, healthier, better life. You see in the blue zones, it is, whole food diet, and it's sleep, and it's movement, and it's community and relationship, right? And that's where it is. And in boutique fitness, we're able to build that community and relationship in these small boxes that you can't really easily build in a big box.
Final question to you then, Anthony. Instead of a takeaway from the conversation, but I'll call this the 3.0 version of Anthony. But what would you say is something that very recently in your career, and you've certainly grown and adapted and constantly learned new things. Like, is there anything that this version of Anthony has probably just learned, or an important thing that maybe you can share for anyone that's listening that maybe you didn't have the realization maybe sort of 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, from me, it's about us having control of the business. People don't realize that I sold control of Exponential, to TPG and Club Pilates in 2017. So as much as I was running the business, I still had a parent, and the parent stepped in and told me what to do in a lot of key ways and times. And so what we like about today is that we own 100% of the business. We have no debt. We're able to function on the best behalf of the franchisees. You look at these brands we've taken over. We've, like a Body 20, we've put a ton of money into iFlex and Body 20 and Beam, just to come in and support the franchisees to try and drive revenue. And that's where we spend our money. You guys will see this next week, some key hires in Pilates in the industry. And, we're out hiring people that are hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've given away 20+% of the company in equity at this point. So everybody that is on our payroll is also on our cap table. And so, we're excited about that. And so we're pushing ahead, but we're definitely able to spend our time, effort, and energy focused on franchisee success, which is where we've always been focused. And that's how we were able to grow the last business we grew, because, we had that success in a material way.
Well, it's been great to have you on, Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to see the growth of what you're doing this year. I can't wait to catch up with you in a few months. I'm sure I'll see you soon. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and like. And we also have something called the Lifts Briefs that we launched at the top of the year. You could subscribe to that. It's a monthly brief that we send where we take good episodes like this, we summarize it, and we send it out to you. You could subscribe to that on our website, liftspodcast.com.